Hey everyone, greetings. It's Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout, and I'm reporting from Oxford, England. I've come back to my alma mater to speak at the Oxford Union last night in a debate on freedom of speech, and my teammate was Dave Rubin of the Rubin Report, as well as some wonderful Oxford students. They and we were arguing in favor of the proposition this house would cancel culture, and the opposition, which included gay rights activist Peter Tatchell and an author whose book is called The Case for Cancel Culture, were arguing that cancel culture is a good thing. And there should be more of it. So I'm glad to say it was very close, but we won. Free speech won. And I thought that I should, because it's going to be a little while before the speech is posted on the Oxford Union's website, I thought I just should read to you from my notes from my speech, sharing with you what I said last night. There's never been, I hope there are some viewers in the United Kingdom, there's never been a more important time for this issue of freedom of speech in Britain to be brought to the fore, advocated for. Free speech is under horrible attack in Britain and in the Republic of Ireland, as well as in former robust democracies around the world. So we'll just get going. What does it mean to be canceled? I was canceled. In July of 2021, I accurately reported menstrual damage from mRNA injections. This is a story that many of you who follow my work know well. Women were reporting their own body's experience. This was the kind of work I'd done for decades as a quote unquote feminist icon. I later learned via two lawsuits by the attorneys general of Missouri and Louisiana that the White House itself put pressure on Twitter and Facebook to censor me. My life collapsed. My bio was altered around the world overnight, with awards and honors replaced with conspiracy theorist, quote unquote. I lost a six-figure investment in my company. None of the media sites for whom I'd written and appeared for 4 decades would speak to me anymore. Yet what I'd reported was true and important. 450,000 Pfizer documents released under court order under the oversight of 3,250 doctors and scientists that we convened revealed that Pfizer knew what they were doing to women. In the Pfizer documents is a chart of tens of thousands of women who are menstrually damaged. 15,000 women bleeding every day, 10,000 women bleeding twice a month, 7,500 women having no periods at all post-injection, meaning they're totally infertile. Women hemorrhaging, 10-year-old girls bleeding upon injection, 85-year-old women bleeding upon injection. Now, many peer-reviewed studies have confirmed what I reported in 2021. We also found damage in the Pfizer documents to ovaries, sperm, breast milk, placentas, even the testes of baby boys in utero. Unsurprisingly, live births are way down in Europe per government databases. They're down 13 to 20%, according to mathematician Igor Chudov. But silencing me did not make those facts go away. Silencing me did not save the babies or the women. Though even now the UK has tried to keep you, meaning you in Britain, from becoming aware of what we found, Ofcom, your media watchdog, held in a court procedure that a statement that Mark Stein's show on GB News about my findings made can be true, but must still be censored if the statement might be upsetting. All that censorship did not make those facts go away. This House, meaning the Oxford Union, should cancel culture. Why? A, censorship does not work. You may be thinking I'm just going to argue that censorship is morally evil, but I have found that censorship actually does not work. I wrote my Oxford DPhil on the history of censorship. Censorship doesn't work, and the censors over time are always wrong. They're always standing on the wrong side of history. And why is this? Because human consciousness evolved. It's not static. The conventional wisdom of 1857 is not the conventional wisdom of today, and today's conventional wisdom is not going to be what everyone understands to be true 20 years from now. What's been canceled by censors in the past, I will tell you. Socrates was censored by the Athenian state in 399 BC for, quote, corrupting the youth of Athens and for, quote, impiety, end quote. He faced the ultimate censorship. He was put to death by being poisoned with hemlock. The officials of the Spanish Inquisition censored Jewish prayers and practices, including striking out Jewish prayers with acid ink. Famous prayers such as the Aleinu and Kol Nidre were censored by these officials. That did not make Judaism go away. Christianity has been censored. The 1560 Geneva Bible, which you who follow my work know that I am reading through, that was a Bible that was translated directly from the Hebrew in Geneva by a group of English Protestant reformers who would have been martyred, and indeed one of them was martyred eventually, if they were to have done this work in England, right? All they wanted to do was to translate the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament so accurately that, as they put it, any shepherd lad could understand it. But this was subversive at the time, extremism, if you like, and that Protestant Bible, Shakespeare's Bible, the Puritans' Bible, Thomas Jefferson's Bible, that was censored by the state. John Milton's 1644 pamphlet, Areopagitica, which argued for free speech and against censorship, was declared an illegal pamphlet by the British state. John Milton argued that the state should not be allowed to punish writers because their work caused controversy. Today, John Milton is considered one of the greatest of English writers, of course. Tom Paine, the polemicist, one of the great voices of the American Revolution, his pamphlet, The Age of Reason, was banned in the United Kingdom. Publishers who tried to publish it were prosecuted for printing it. He argued for scientific reason as opposed to unquestioned religious obedience to authority. So the debate we are having today, meaning yesterday, the debate that is underway, isn't a new one. You all, meaning Britain, you've already had an experiment with it, with full-on censorship that lasted almost 100 years, and that dated from the Obscene Publications Act of 1857. This act made the sale of obscene material a statutory offense. Well, that was a very vague statute. It didn't define obscenity very clearly at all, which is a problem that censors and censorship continues to have, right? What is extremism? That is literally a question my husband and I were asked on our visa application to come into Britain this time around. It's a new question as far as I can recall. Have you ever been accused or suspected of extremism or extremist thought? How do you answer that? You know, one man's extremism is another man's cutting edge provocation or original insight, right? What is extremism? All of these great thinkers at one time were considered extremists. The vagueness of the statute showed that one man's art was another's pornography. Walt Whitman was censored. Leaves of Grass, his great poem about love, about homoerotic love, was censored. It was illegal to print it, to distribute it. Pirated copies were passed from hand to hand. Algernon Charles Swinburne lost an entire print run due to fears of censorship. Booksellers up and down England and Scotland faced 2 to 3 month prison sentences, and their books were confiscated. Actual printing presses were destroyed by the state. The first British legal gay rights advocate, my hero of my book Outrages, John Addington Symonds, had to write his same-sex love poems in secret and he had to keep them in a locked box because even owning them or sharing them could send him to prison and could send the recipients to prison. Any discussion of what we call homosexuality was completely unlawful because of the Obscene Publications Act. Women, too, as a result of this legislation, could not legally describe their own bodies. In 1877, Annie Besant, who was a birth control activist, was tried under this statute for distributing a 30-year-old medical text about family planning, literally the most boring, unerotic pamphlet you can imagine about literally how to space your pregnancies. The shadows cast by the Obscene Publications Act didn't lift until the 1959 revision of that act. So nearly 100 years of British censorship prevailed. But all that censorship, again, it did not work. All that censorship did not work. It didn't kill gay people or discussions about homosexuality. It didn't kill off contraception or women's efforts to find out how to regulate their pregnancies. It didn't kill off discussion about sexuality or sexuality itself. All that censorship didn't kill off in the past. It didn't kill off Judaism. In spite of Judaism having been outlawed, it didn't kill off Christianity. It didn't kill off Socrates' work. It didn't kill off John Milton's work. It didn't kill off D.H. Lawrence, who was later censored in a famous trial, Lady Chatterley's Lover, or Walt Whitman's. They're all considered some of our greatest writers of all time now. They're taught in high schools. But what it did do, that near century of full-on legal censorship, is it did kill off many masterpieces, many revolutions for social progress, many medical and scientific insights that would have died without being born. That's what it succeeded in doing. Censorship does not work. Lastly, we should cancel culture by deciding really who actually loves you. And here's what I mean. And remember, I was speaking to an auditorium full of about 300 or 400 students. Teaching is a form of love. Learning is a form of love. So is argument a form of love. Who really loves you? Free speech advocates or censors? Who really cares about your well-being? I did what I did in speaking up for the truth because I am a mom. I have children the ages, and a stepchild the ages of you all, the young people in the room, young people who may be listening to this broadcast now. People who fought and died to defend your right to read and write and speak did so out of love for you. Young people whom they probably knew they would never even live to see. I spoke up because I did not want my children's generation to have fewer rights and liberties than my generation had. You are adults and you are scholars. As adults, you need the truth, and you also need to examine all points of view that claim to be the truth. You do not need to be swaddled like tiny babies by gatekeepers who believe you cannot handle thinking for yourselves. That is not love. That is some weird kind of suffocating neurosis and control, but that is not love. That is not in your best interest. As students, you need free speech and thought because without them, nothing you do now will really ever matter. Your generation must pick up this sacred fight yet again, I'm afraid, for your time. And I believe in you. I love you. I care about you. Other people believe in you and love you and care about you. And we are all fighting for you, for your right to read, think, speak. We have every faith that you will fight and you will prevail. You have to. Daily headlines show the United Kingdom now arresting people for posting their opinions on social media or for praying silently outside of abortion clinics. This is not Britain. This is not a democracy. Your action to defend historic freedoms of speech is urgent. From the founding of the Oxford colleges, starting 1,000 years ago, the Union itself in the early 19th century, Britain's core values, in spite of waves of attempts to censor, include and are founded on free speech. You could even say that Britain is the birthplace of the idea of freedom of speech. You should reject cancel culture, not just because it's un-American, which I'm sure you've heard, or because it's undemocratic, but also because fundamentally cancel culture and censorship are un-British. As the famed writer John Milton put it, quote, "Give me the liberty to know, to utter, and to argue freely according to conscience and all liberties. A good book is the precious lifeblood of a master's spirit, embalmed and treasured up to a life beyond life." That was it. That was my statement. That was my 12-minute. It's actually a very tight format. It's 12 minutes to make your case. And that was the case that I made for the students of Oxford, and it's going to be posted on YouTube probably in a week and a half or so. Hopefully the students and young adults throughout the world to really think about what it means to lose the right to speak freely, think freely, argue, write freely. Let's see what our commentators are saying. Patty Smith says, "May God resolve in us all to having done everything stand." Yeah, that's truer words were never spoken. I mean, put on the armor of righteousness. If someone would post the quote, I'll read it. That's very, very timely at a time like this. Karen, sorry, I'm having trouble reading. Karen McMurdo says, "Yes, I've always said cancel culture. It's terrible." She also said, "Amazing, thank you." Thank you, dear. I can't see any more comments, so this could be a brief presentation of mine, or I could go on and say a little bit more about this journey and where we find ourselves. It's very interesting. There's a wave of censorship, as you know, not just in Britain and the Republic of Ireland, but really going across Western Europe. And you know that the Vice President, J.D. Vance, came to Germany and gave a blistering speech about Europe failing to protect its legacy of freedoms of speech, and about the cancellation of the Romanian elections, and about restrictions on freedoms of speech, throughout Europe. And he basically said, if you're not going to protect democracy, we're not on board for funding you forever. And Sarah Wright said, listening and learning. And that I'm here in Europe, of course. I've been in Lithuania, Vilnius, which was wonderful, but also sobering, right? And now I'm here in the United Kingdom, and you can really feel the shockwaves that President Trump's isolationist position toward Europe, his slashing of USAID, which has funded many, many NGOs in Europe and around the world, and also just his declaration to Europe that we're not going to fight the war in Ukraine, all by ourselves, or even primarily, that we're going to turn our attention to our own shores, and that Europe has to step up and pay for its own weapons and provide its own soldiers and, defend its own national interests. That has been such a wrenching, stunning blow to not just the political status quo for decades, really since the post-war era, I think, USAID more recently than that, but the idea of the US kind of providing, manpower and weaponry for Europe. I hadn't even realized this. Brian explained goes back to the rebuilding after World War II, when we had to do it because these nations were in ruins. Well, that was a long time ago, and these nations are not in ruins. And Brian and I were both kind of observing in Europe just how much that easier it is for people here than it is in the United States right now. Like in in the Baltic states, people are, elegantly dressed, and women are raising their own babies. It appears that there's a lot of stay-at-home moms somehow, and so many babies are being born. People can afford babies. Thank God, it's a real, like, you see babies everywhere as opposed to in the United States. People are having tea and coffee at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Museums are open. The infrastructure is fantastic. There are no homeless people visible, at least, no drug addiction, no fentanyl. I mean, I'm sure it exists, but it's not like in your face, no one living in tents. In the cities, the infrastructure works, the public transport works. Everything's gleaming. There's new construction everywhere, gleaming skyscrapers outside of the historic city centers. And even in Britain, I mean, Britain looks a little scruffier. There's more of the kind of suffering you see in the United States. But even in Britain, there's a middle class, people are fed, people have healthcare. Bad things are happening here. I mean, you hear constantly about the horrible expenses of just heating your home, making sure your lights are on and your heat is on. There's a war on the people of Britain too. But I guess what I'm trying to say is neither of these countries looks as grim as the United States of America right now. In neither of these capitals do you see the kind of thing you see in New York or LA of people completely destitute, hopeless, out of their minds on, a plethora of exotic drugs. They're flowing in over the border. You don't see the despair. You don't feel the despair that you feel in America of people working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet, just to put food on the table. It's a much more luxurious life here. And I guess what I'm trying to say is overhearing a lot of conversations by Europeans, and I have a very balanced view of all of this. I think, I think DOGE should do its work with a lot more cybersecurity oversight. I'm worried about a control grid with the data that DOGE is sucking up into its own private AI, possibly of Elon Musk. I'm worried about all of that. I think if you are going to hew out vast programs, which is very exciting, I agree, all the savings, you have to show the URLs of the programs you're clearing out, and I haven't seen those, not yet, not on DOGE's website, not in any searchable format. If you're going to say there are so many people collecting Social Security who are over 100 years old, you got to show it. You got to show some documentation. You can block out the personally identifying information, but it can't just be claims, right? And I'm a supporter of this administration. I want them to do well. But even with those caveats, again, with USAID, I'm sure, I believe that vast tranches of it are pure waste, corruption, or money laundering. But at the same time, I know that around the world, it does, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, it does create soft power, positive feelings about the United States of America to have our flag on those sacks of rice that are going to desperate people in refugee camps, or programs that help women who are being gang raped or, targeted for ritual burnings or having acid thrown in their faces. Like, some of those are good programs, right? They're good for America. They keep us safe because they provide a beacon of idealism about American values that is a counterbalance to, like, Islamic extremism, for instance, or just generalized, communist hatred for the United States flowing from China, or other kinds of hostility, anti-American feeling coming out of Iran. But having said all of that, the big picture here in Europe is I'm pretty mad as an American because the conversations that you hear all around without even trying to eavesdrop, right, are very affluent people, business people especially, complaining about having to get off the gravy train, you know, and complaining as if, and the thing that shocks me is how can there never have been a plan B in Europe, right? How can European leaders have assumed that America would pick up such a disproportionate share of the cost of defending all of Europe, right? That's money that doesn't have to go to defense, so it can go to these beautiful childcare centers and these gorgeous parks and the fantastic museums and the wonderful transportation. How could it be such a surprise that one day there would be an administration that is not on board for that arrangement and that there's no plan B? And so as an American, I just keep thinking about the people of North Carolina whose fate until recently was not reported on in legacy media at all, right? Or the people of, the Appalachians, or the people of LA, right? Or the people of Maui, and how desperate people are with no help in the United States of America. And I'm just angry that I'm hearing so many, I'm sorry, I don't want to alienate my last European friends, but it makes me very frustrated as an American that there's this sense of entitlement to American taxpayer dollars at a time when the average European is doing so much better, living such a higher quality of life than the average American, who, is living from paycheck to paycheck. So that's my takeaway. But you really can feel the shock, right? That what do you mean? There are going to be tariffs. Literally everything I purchase here, I'm going to have to pay value-added tax on when I get to the airport, which is a form of a tariff. I have to pay for it twice, essentially, to the British government when I leave the United Kingdom. Universities, I think Oxford is still, what was it last time I checked? It was like £9,000 a year. That was some years ago. Maybe it's 15,000 now. I don't know, but it's like a fraction of what a good university costs for Americans. There's just so much suffering in the United States, and I don't hear any reasonable discourse on the BBC or when I'm on continental Europe and we're listening to television there, political news there, there's everyone's just mad at Trump, right? They're just mad at Trump and they're mad at America. And I'm not hearing any from commentators or leaders, occasionally from heads of NGOs, you do hear it, any kind of compassion for the people of the United States or recognition that it's okay to put your own country first. Or even Americans are suffering too. They must really need to count every penny. They can't afford this massive flow of billions to NGOs all over the world. They can't afford to defend all of some of the richest economies in the world, Germany, France, Britain, instead of Germany, France, and Britain defending themselves. There's literally no slack there's no compassion for Americans. And maybe that's because we've had it so good for so long. Maybe that's because we've been so rich and kind of obnoxious for the entire, post-war period. 60 years? More than that. 1945. Yeah. 70, 80 years, we've, been the richest economy in the world. We have projected our power around the world. We've fought 600 dirty wars. Maybe people are just truly sick of Americans in the rest of the world or have no compassion for them. But there is literally no space to consider that America is going broke, and that if we don't curtail our spending, we're going to go bankrupt, and that Americans are suffering, and we need money just like Ukraine needs money, just like France needs money, just like Germany needs money. We need it too. And no compassion that it's okay to put your own countrymen first. So that's a weird feeling. So it's very divided. Some people are very supportive, right? just in a grassroots level of the changes underway. They recognized that things were corrupt and rotten and needed to change. And other people are just, especially the dominant discourse is just like targeting America as via Trump, right? Via hating Trump as a baby, selfish, destructive, infantile, immature, bad actor on the world scene. So it's a very interesting time to be here. But at the same time, I would say J.D. Vance's statement about free speech and American support is exactly right. For decades, our foreign policy was predicated on the idea, we didn't always live up to it, right? We supported plenty of vicious dictatorships and installed plenty of vicious dictatorships, but our narrative was we spread democracy around the world, right? That was behind so much of what we did, so many consulates, so many cultural programs. I mean, I was sent around Germany when I was a young feminist with my first book, The Beauty Myth, by the consulate, or by the the U.S. consulate, because I was bringing American culture to Germany. It was kind of a shared culture program or a cultural ambassador program. Those programs are around the world. I mean, that's why you have people around the world, especially in closed societies, who cherish writers like Steinbeck or who listened to Voice of America, who cherished the ideal of America, who held on to it as a beacon of liberty. But how is it wrong for J.D. Vance to say to Europe, you're not perfect. You're really not perfect right now. And if you keep acting like tyrannies, there's no reason for you to expect us to support you. Like, that's been our posture with governments around the world. They're supposed to shape up and engage in democracy. Remember the war in Iraq, which was like a nonsensical narrative, but that was the narrative. Bush Jr.'s whole narrative was, we've got to, bring democracy to Iraq, right? It was farcical, but that was our self-image. That was what we were supposed to be doing around the world, shining a light, human rights, freedom, free speech, liberty, freedom of expression. So to me, I loved what J.D. Vance had to say, and I think it's high time. And it's weird that Europeans listening, many of them, again, I'm not talking about ordinary people, right, at every level of life. I'm sure I see that there's a movement for free speech here in Britain. I'm being told that consistently. The kids last night, the young adults, were very on the edge of their seat, trying to understand this issue, figure it out. It was very crowded. It was a very thoroughly attended event. But there's so much censorship. I mean, the last time I was in Britain, I was standing with Mark Stein, the former GB News commentator, who had to go to court because his show was kicked off the air because he reported the dangers that we were finding in the Pfizer documents. And the court ruled that, well, as you heard in my speech, it didn't matter if it was true because it had to be censored if it was upsetting. And there were no journalists in the room. Like the biggest story for British media, right? Affecting British media. No journalists, no television, no print journalists. There was one kind of wire journalist in the room. And I barely saw a mention of the real issues at stake there. And Mark Stein had to produce tens of thousands of pounds to pay for his own legal costs after that decision, that nonsensical decision. So Europe needs to be metaphorically shaken out of its tyrannical dreams. I'm trying to say that very peacefully. I mean, metaphorically, Europe needs to be told, you are not acting like a democracy. You have to, recommit to what is universal human rights law. It's not new, it's not alien, but when Britain, arrests people for their thoughts on social media, it's violating its own laws, right? Going to Canada, when Canada freezes the truckers' money for speech, they're violating their own Charter of Rights. When Romania cancels elections, the EU has kind of the equivalent of a constitution, right? And all of this is in violation of agreements about what a democracy is that Europe signed on to long ago. So hooray for J.D. Vance. I just hope that we're not in a moment where our attention as Americans is being directed at shortcomings of free speech and democracy in Europe and being directed at very dizzying and exciting headlines about what they were just finding, even while certain undemocratic uh, shifts and processes are being put into place, right? I mean, as thrilled as I am about all the waste and corruption, I do believe that our tripartite system of government in the US, in which Congress holds the power of the purse, is a really important part of how our founders set up our system. And emasculating Congress completely or bypassing Congress in spending and slashing spending, it may be fun right now, but we're going to have a hangover, someday. Having no cybersecurity oversight, as I've been warning, and people are really mad at me in the United States for warning this, but I stand by it. Think of my track record. I'm 95% right. We may be in an orgy of fun headlines about the nonsense that Doge is finding. I'm sorry. But if all of our data are sucked out into a private cloud, right, we don't know, and into privately held AI, that is what Catherine Austin Fitts calls a control grid. I don't love it that AP and Reuters have been kicked out of the White House briefing room. It's exciting that independent media has been admitted, and certainly those news outlets are thoroughly corrupt, full of conflicts of interest. I mean, the head of Reuters was the head of Pfizer. I mean, on the Pfizer board, some nonsensical conflict of interest for a while. But it's, always imagine what would happen if people you hate had those powers, those same powers. So someday it won't be the Bush administration. It'll be, another administration. Do you want them to eject Breitbart and Fox News and, independent observers like me or War Room? No, right? Because that's not our First Amendment. Imagine if it's a Biden light, if it's another Democratic regime. Do you want them to be able to put together and filter all of your private data into an app that can switch you on and switch you off, especially if it's in privately held hands? I don't think you do. Do you want them to bypass your congressperson to cut things that your congressperson voted for? It's really fun now, but we have to be very careful that we're not recreating another tyranny. Like, we always have to be careful that we're not recreating another tyranny, because I'm saying this as a former political consultant. If people can consolidate power, they will. If they can punish their enemies, they will. And I mean, punish them beyond the democratic ideal that our founders set up. So I'm just issuing that warning, because history really shows that it can be so much fun to be on the winning team, but if we don't preserve our actual three-part system, constitution, due process of law, then very quickly we've got an oligarchy. And I'm not just talking about Trump, I'm talking about anyone. And very quickly, the other side could inherit those same powers. That's what I've been saying consistently, ever since 2007. You don't want the president to have the power to detain anyone without charge or trial, which happened with the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act, because someday it's going to be the other people, detaining you, right? So you always have to project into the future. Do you really want, Biden's heir or Newsom or God, who, Microsoft, right, advising a future Democratic regime to have all your Social Security information, all your medical information, to badger judges, to threaten to investigate judges, right? You really want that independence and that integrity of our systems. And once again, I've said something that I believe to be true, and that no doubt many people will be upset at me for warning, but I really have studied this very deeply. And, half the country was cheering when President Obama was elected. Cheering, cheering, cheering. He could do no wrong. Well, the first thing he did was start to he kept Guantanamo open. He said he would close it. And not long thereafter, he made a kill list of Americans. Imagine that. Like, no one is immune from the seductions of aggregating power beyond what our wonderful founders intended. So that is my caution for you. And I guess the last thing I would say before I sign off, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm also going to read some of your comments, is I'm going to be next writing an essay called How Not to Be a Patriot, because this is my final thought, I promise, but some people are really mad at me for my essay warning about what could happen, how easily a control grid could be created by Doge filtering these data sets, right, without proper cybersecurity, NDAs, non-competes, etc. An NDA is a non-disclosure agreement. Well, again, as a former political consultant, and this is just a preview of the essay, right? You're not being a good patriot by never criticizing the leader that you support. And I know some of you support President Trump, some of you may not, many of you watching may not, but whether you support him or not, even if you support him, you're not being a good patriot by telling everyone around you never to criticize him and stifling your own criticisms of things he may do that you see problems with. Why do I say that? Because at that level, again, speaking as having advised Clinton's reelection campaign and Vice President Gore, at that level where someone is a principal, meaning running a country, or standing next to the guy running the country, they're surrounded by a bubble of advisors who all have their own agendas, right? And lobbyists who have their own agendas, special interests who have their own agendas, family members who have their own agendas, donors who have their own agendas. And they're making decisions. I've often said it's like they're standing in one place and multiple trains are coming at them full speed all day long, right? From different directions. So in that bubble, they're not getting objective advice. Even polling doesn't give them a very good read on the electorate. The only way a president can really make good decisions is if he hears from his constituents, right? And the only way he's going to hear from his constituents, given the filter of media, is through social media, through people voicing with their own opinions, or writing to him, of course, but publicly voicing what they like and what they don't like. If any good president can make mistakes, right? They're not superhuman. No one is superhuman. And if you may love 80% or 90% of what President Trump is doing, I love about 60% of what he's doing. But if there's something very serious, like embracing CRISPR technology, right, or introducing Albert Bourla as one of the best guys around, or very seriously, letting, in my view, Doge access all of our data without proper cybersecurity oversight, or whatever you may think is not quite right, whatever you're concerned about. You're not being a good American by being quiet about it. And you're not even being a good Trump supporter by being quiet about it. The only way he can do a good job, and what for a president doing a good job includes having high ratings, high poll ratings, lots of support, money in the bank politically, right? Grassroots support. The only way he can continue to do that is if he hears from you. And if something is a misstep, according to a lot of people, like, I think, God forbid, they go after Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid now, right? Well, he's not hearing from the people receiving Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid right now in their millions. So if that's your issue, if that's what you're concerned about, say it. You're not hurting him by publicly letting a president and his advisors know what is popular and unpopular. You are helping him. You are helping him. They follow trends on social media. They read your, the general consensus on posts. They get it when there's a backlash. So, speak up. That helps a president course correct and do better. And also, everyone around him has a seat at the table. Very, very powerful people, but most ordinary people don't have a seat at the table. So the only way that grassroots sentiment can have a seat at the table when those issues are decided at that highest level is if you speak up critically. And it doesn't mean call him names or sabotage him or subvert him, but it does mean, and our founders knew this, that honest feedback, honest criticism is the best way you show your real patriotism when something is not going the way that you want it to as a voter, as a constituent. It is very healthy for you to do that. It's very good. It's very patriotic. And I guess the last thing I would say, and then I really will stop, is I've really never understood this really interesting tendency many people have, almost a fantasy life of, well, if we just get the leader in that we want, he can do no wrong or she can do no wrong, and we can just bask in that person's personality and go back to the couch and watch Netflix. That is a very dangerous temptation, a very dangerous point of view. Again, no one's perfect. No one's perfect. And the real work of being a patriot and keeping this great ship of your nation, whatever your nation is, going in the right direction it doesn't stop when you get the right person or your guy or girl in. It really kind of starts then. You have to continue to work. You have to continue to lobby, to make your voice heard. Your job isn't over, right? And so I just want to say, please don't yield to the temptation of thinking, well, the guy I want is in, everything's going to be fine. He can do no wrong. Everything he does is perfect. It doesn't help him. It doesn't help the country. And I'm going to say it, it's a lazy way to be a patriot. So continue to work, continue to speak up. No one's perfect. Believe me, the people around him who do have access to him are lobbying him day and night. There's no reason you should be any different. Just because you're not, a huge donor or a mega lobbyist or some other, highest level constituent, highest level of power constituent. All right. I hope that's okay that I spoke frankly to you. I know my followers forgive me when I speak frankly, because even if they're initially mad, everyone always settles down and realizes, I'm not going to say realizes that I'm right, but a little bit. Okay, let's see. I'm in Libland, Seattle, born and raised. I do not go to events in the city anymore, including ball games, concerts, or even go to my beloved Pike Place Market. That's so sad, Sheila Field. And she rightly says, I'm sorry we have people being abused here in USA, so let's fix that first. America has been footing the bill for decades. I think that's very true. Karen McMurdo says, it always amazes me that America is a strong nation, yet no infrastructure for healthcare or basic living needs. That's also true. I mean, that's a longer conversation about individualism and fear of socialism, but I agree with you. There should be an option. She also says, I do believe fate has been turned around because of Trump. It does seem that way in an interesting way. Imagine where we'd be right now. And by the way, some of my dearest friends in Europe are really mad at me for having supported Trump. So this is a price I'm going to have to pay. It's very sad, though. I wish we could still just agree to disagree like we used to in the past. Pi Records says, and what's with Trump's blind spot on COVID-19 and Pfizer? Booed at White House just yesterday. Will Trump get a change of heart and mind on C-19 FUBAR? I don't know the answer to that, but I know a lot of people are asking for sure. And that was a very mysterious event. Those of you who may not know what Pi Records is talking about, Albert Bourla was introduced at the White House and booed. Could have been a setup or not, right? We just don't know. Karen McMurdo said Orwell saw the future of society. Very, very true. Why is Trump and Kennedy allowing mRNA into animals now? I may have missed that if that happened. Certainly not covered over here, but right, that's why we have to remain vigilant. The pressures on these men to yield are so intense. We have to be a counter pressure. Pi Record says RFK Jr., will he help change Trump's mind on COVID-19 and mRNA shots? I really don't know. I see a lot of gestural activity coming out of the White House, like stopping federal funding of colleges that still mandate COVID-19 shots. That's kind of maximal press, minimal political capital. We'll see. Again, I'm going to be really annoying. It depends on us. Satori says, thank you, Naomi. It really is everybody's duty to speak one's mind in a respectful manner. Unfortunately, this view is no longer shared by many. Well, that is a perfect note, if slightly sad to end on. But all of you are willing to have a good, free, frank conversation about issues. And all of you are patriots. Whatever we all may believe, I think the last few years have really shown us that we can believe a lot of things in terms of policies, but that doesn't mean we are or are not patriots. It's our love of country and our speaking up on behalf of our country that makes us a patriot, not the specific policies we all decide on or don't. And I just want to say to Europeans who are watching or people around the world, our fights are joined. And I know there's a lot of hope as well in Europe and around the world that Americans are closing their borders, getting men out of women's sports, embracing free speech, trying for peace instead of endless globalist wars. That's really giving and like just embracing the nation state, which is, was never a bad thing to embrace. The nation state could be the most perfect form of government, a democratic nation state ever. And it was wrong that we were propagandized that it wasn't. So I'm going to sign off now. But thank you for listening to me. Again, broadcasting from Oxford University in England. And thanks for talking with me about free speech. And if you're listening from countries around the world or certainly in Europe or here in Britain, know that we will keep fighting for you as well. And our fight is joined. And please support us on Daily Clout. You can subscribe or become a member. You can support me by subscribing on Substack to Outspoken. And we really appreciate you. Take care.